Under the Speaker's announced policy of January 6, 2015, the Chair recognizes the gentleman from Ohio, Mr. Jordan, for 30 minutes.
I thank the Speaker. Mr. Speaker, John Koskinen should no longer hold office. John Koskinen should no longer be the Commissioner of the Internal Revenue Service. And tonight I'm joined by some of my colleagues to talk about why that should happen, why he should be removed from office. You remember what took place here. The Internal Revenue Service targeted our fellow citizens for their political beliefs. They did it, and they got caught. And maybe most importantly tonight, thinking about the current commissioner, the targeting continues. Now, you don't have to take my word for it. You can take what the United States Appellate Court for the District of Columbia stated just last month. This decision from August 5th, 2016, last month, from the opinion, the IRS has admitted to the Inspector General, to the District Court, and to us, United States Court of Appeals for the District of Columbia, that applications for exemption by some of the plaintiffs have never to this day been processed. They're still targeting conservative groups. They say it again right here. It's absurd to suggest that the effect of the IRS's unlawful conduct, which delayed the processing of plaintiffs' applications, has been eradicated when two of the plaintiffs' applications remain pending. So here's the takeaway. They're still doing it. Here's the standard. Standard for removing someone from office: gross negligence, breach of public trust, dereliction of duty. Mr. Koskinen has certainly had those things take place under his tenure at the Internal Revenue Service. Here's the facts. February 2014, John Koskinen's chief counsel is on notice that there are problems with Lois Lerner's hard drive and missing emails from during the time of the initial targeting. They wait 4 months before they tell Congress and therefore the American people. And during that 4 months, they learn in February, oh, we got missing emails, problems with Lois Lerner's hard drive, the central figure in this scandal. They wait until June before they tell Congress and the American people. During that 4-month time frame, 422 backup tapes are destroyed. Most importantly, they are destroyed with 3 orders to preserve all documents, and 2 subpoenas to get those documents are in place. Now think about that. You got missing emails. The backup tapes that contain those missing emails are destroyed. During the 4 months you're trying to figure out, 4 months before you tell Congress, and those 422 backup tapes contain potentially 24,000 emails. That's why he should no longer hold office. That's why it's important that we take this vote at some point and remove him from office. So you got the standard, which he certainly meets based on that fact pattern, and you got the court, which just told us last month the targeting continues. Last thing I'll say before turning to my colleagues. No private citizen could get away with that same scenario. Any one of us, any one of the 750,000 people we all get to represent, any of those folks back in the 4th District of Ohio, which I have the privilege of serving, any one of those folks are audited by the IRS, and they discover that they're missing documents that are critical to that audit and critical to what the IRS is looking for, and they wait 4 months to tell the IRS that they're missing those documents, and during that time, the backup disk, the backup tape that contains those missing documents somehow gets destroyed, what's going to happen to them? Well, they're definitely getting fined, and they're probably going to jail. But somehow when it happens to John Koskinen, the Commissioner of the IRS, it's okay. It's not okay. It is not okay in this country, and this is what frosts so many Americans today. There are now 2 standards in this country, one for we the people and a different one for the politically connected. One for us regular folk and a different one if your name is Lerner, Koskinen, or Clinton. And that's not supposed to be how it works in this country, not the greatest nation ever, where we're all supposed to be treated equally under the law. And with that, I'd yield to my good friend, the gentleman from Louisiana, Mr. Fleming.
Well, Jim, thank you so much for having this special order tonight. And my good friend, Congressman Jordan has laid out the facts of this case. There are many other detailed facts that we don't have time to get into. But just to give you an example of what my constituents are saying to me, they are over the top angry at just what Congressman Jordan was talking about, and that is there seems to be two standards in America. There's one standard for the elite. There's one standard for the high-up officials in Washington, and then there is a standard for everyone else. And we see this played out all the time. But there are some very notable groups and people who support our effort to begin the impeachment of John Koskinen, head of the IRS. I'll just give you some examples. The National Review Editorial Board. A weaponized IRS put to partisan political ends constitutes an unbearable assault on American democracy and undermines the very institutions of government itself, end quote. The Wall Street Journal, their editorial board, quote, the U.S. Attorney has refused to honor Congress's contempt charge against Ms. Lerner for refusing to testify. The Justice Department has closed its investigations into the IRS targeting without prosecutions. And the press corps winks at abuses of power when conservatives are the targets. And that's precisely the point. It appears that the media, the liberal media, which most media is nationally, seems to be agreeing with this. In fact, I've had a number of media outlets out there who ask me, why would you want to impeach the head of the IRS? What's wrong with him? And yet you heard how we learned that Mr. Koskinen deceived Congress, refused to respond to subpoenas, destroyed or it was evidence was destroyed in his tenure. So either he did it or someone did it while under his authority, and then again deceived Congress about that as well. So it's very clear there's been wrongdoing, and while Mr. Koskinen has come to the Hill here to talk to members, but he wants to do it offline and without being sworn in, he's not shown no interest in doing it under oath. The New York Post editorial board, quote, if you responded to an IRS audit the way Koskinen's IRS has behaved, you'd be looking at huge penalties and maybe prison time. George Will, noted conservative, Congress should impeach the IRS commissioner or risk becoming obsolete. Red State, why the impeachment of the IRS commissioner is a sign that Congress might actually work. You see, the American people have given up on Congress. Congress is the legislative branch, which is a co-equal branch of government, and it should be a check on the executive branch and the judicial branch for that matter. And yet Congress has shriveled up and atrophied so much. The American people have given up on Congress to ever do anything about corruption at high levels of our government. And then Americans for Tax Reform. Why Congress should impeach IRS Commissioner John Koskinen. Quote, since then, Koskinen has failed to reform the IRS, with the agency becoming increasingly politicized. Under Koskinen, the agency destroyed several sources of Lois Lerner's emails while he gave numerous false statements to Congress under oath, end quote. So it's very clear, very notable people, patriots, and people of stature, people who are well respected in America, agree with the House Freedom Caucus that we should move forward. And finally, before I yield, there's been polling on this matter. FreedomWorks, for instance, has commissioned a poll, and very clearly the American people say by as much as a 66% net positive over negative that John Koskinen should lose his job. So I think it's very clear. And then before I yield, I would just say that we're not sure what votes that we're going to have tomorrow on this subject, but any vote short of impeachment of the IRS commissioner would be a vote against impeachment and would be a vote against showing Mr. Koskinen the door and getting someone who will do right by our leadership in the Internal Revenue Service, a very important agency and one that has been so much abused, or actually victims, Americans have been abused through its institution. So I would be happy to yield back to Mr. Jordan.
I thank the gentleman for his hard work on this issue and for bringing the motion forward to get this issue in front of the Congress. We now recognize the fine gentleman from the state of Arizona, Mr. Gosar, for 2.5 minutes.
I thank the gentleman from Ohio, Mr. Jordan. Now, under the Obama administration, the IRS has consistently proven that it cannot be trusted to serve the best interests of the American people. Unelected bureaucrats like Lois Lerner and John Koskinen have weaponized the agency and used it as a tool to blatantly target innocent Americans simply for having different political beliefs. Rather than cleaning house and restoring the trust of the American people, the IRS Commissioner John Koskinen has continued the pattern of criminal behavior and lawlessness within the IRS. On Koskinen's watch, more than 24,000 emails and 420 backup tapes providing critical evidence were completely erased. Koskinen failed to comply with a congressional subpoena, failed to testify truthfully in front of Congress 4 different times while under oath, and is now the ringleader for the cover-up to the targeting of innocent Americans by this rogue agency. Our founding fathers specifically empowered the House of Representatives with the authority to hold the executive branch in check when it violates the trust of the American people, and more importantly, when it violates the law. The only way we can change the climate of corruption in Washington, D.C. is to make an example of bureaucratic lawlessness. And we can start right now by removing John Koskinen from his job. Just you watch. If the House of Representatives takes action to fire John Koskinen, I guarantee you that the rest of the Obama administration and future administrations to come will get that message. It is beyond outrageous that not a single IRS employee has been brought to justice for targeting innocent Americans. The House has an obligation to pursue all constitutional options on the table to remove John Koskinen, including impeachment. Koskinen and accountability are within our reach, and my colleagues and I will not yield in our efforts to hold this lawless agency accountable until we get it done. And with that, I yield back to the gentleman from Ohio. Thank you.
I thank the gentleman. Now recognize also from the great state of Arizona, the gentleman, Mr. Franks, is recognized.
And I certainly thank the gentleman. Mr. Speaker, Commissioner John Koskinen took over the Internal Revenue Service in the wake of the IRS conservative targeting scandal, ostensibly to reform the agency internally. Instead, he continued his predecessor's legacy of stonewalling justice. After Lois Lerner, director of the IRS's Tax-Exempt Organizations Unit, invoked the Fifth Amendment when she appeared before Congress, the Committee on Oversight and Government Reform issued a subpoena for IRS documents, including all of Lois Lerner's emails. The IRS's chief technology officer also issued a preservation order instructing employees not to destroy any emails, backup tapes, or anything relevant to the investigation. But, Mr. Speaker, despite a congressional subpoena and a do not destroy order, the IRS Inspector General found that the agency had erased 422 backup tapes containing as many as 24,000 emails. All the while, Commissioner John Koskinen knowingly and deliberately kept Congress in the dark. Commissioner Koskinen was clearly aware that the emails were lost, but he knowingly and deliberately withheld that information for Congress and from Congress for 4 months and stonewalled the entire investigation. Mr. Koskinen testified under oath 4 times before Congress during that 4-month period, saying he would turn over all of Lerner's emails, making no mention of the fact that the bulk of them had been, quote, lost. Mr. Koskinen provided false testimony and swore under oath that the information on the bulk of the backup tapes was unrecoverable. The Inspector General found that approximately 700 of those emails had not, in fact, been erased and were, in fact, recoverable. Mr. Speaker, John Koskinen then failed to protect citizens against the same type of future discrimination. A General Accounting Office report found no significant measures had been implemented under Mr. Koskinen's watch to ensure that civil servants at the IRS don't continue in the future to unlawfully target Americans based on their political or religious views. Mr. Speaker, this entire matter is absolutely counter to everything a republic like ours was meant to be. In a constitutional republic like the United States of America, we are fundamentally predicated on the rule of law. And there are very few things that break faith with the American people or that undermines their trust in their government more than witnessing those given the sacred responsibility to enforce tax collection equally and according to the law, using the federal government's power of taxation unlawfully to economically destroy and deliberately oppress American citizens based on their religious or political views. Such a tyrannical abuse of power and the betrayal of their sworn oath to the United States Constitution by Commissioner John Koskinen and Barack Obama will be writ large in their shameful legacy because it is something that goes to the very heart of the rule of law in this republic, and that so many lying out in Arlington National Cemetery died to preserve. Mr. Speaker, the United States Congress has a duty to impeach Commissioner John Koskinen. The impeachment power is a political check that, as Alexander Hamilton wrote in Federalist 65 of 1788, protects the public against abuse or violation of public trust. And Commissioner John Koskinen, appointed by Barack Obama, has unequivocally violated public trust. A taxpayer would never get away with treating an IRS audit the way the IRS officials have treated this congressional investigation. And the Congress of the United States owes it to the American people, to future generations, and our sworn oath to the Constitution to hold the perpetrators of this tyrannical abuse of power accountable and to make sure that this never happens again. I yield back.
Thank you. I thank the gentleman and for all his hard work, and now recognize another hardworking member from the great state of Kansas, Mr. Huelskamp.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. It's a pleasure to be here tonight and tomorrow. This House will have a chance to redeem itself a bit, or at least remain relevant for now. Hopefully, we'll be voting on something of great consequence for a change. Tomorrow, we of this body will be asked to vote for or against removing the IRS Commissioner. Make no mistake, however, this is not just a vote to remove one man from office. It is a vote for or against the rule of law itself. It's a vote for or against maintaining our system of internal checks and balances. It will be a vote for or against accountability for our public officials and transparency in our government. For months, myself and other House Freedom Caucus members have been pushing for this accountability. Those who might oppose this measure most likely believe they are doing the right thing by defending the IRS. In fact, they are defending a toxic status quo in which our nation's most powerful agency, the IRS, can legitimately be used to thwart one's political enemies. This is a status quo in which one party gains power in one branch of government, then uses the resources of that branch of government to depress the power of all other branches of our government. This is something we would expect to see in an emergent democracy, not the greatest republic in the history of man. Let's take a look back about how this all came about. During President Obama's re-election campaign, the IRS systematically prolonged consideration of applications for nonprofit status from hundreds of conservative organizations, in some cases, as we heard this evening, indefinitely. Many of those organizations were never able to recover from this denial. Others were effectively neutralized for the duration of the 2012 election. This, of course, is a matter of fact and not of opinion. Eventually, the discriminatory practice was exposed, and Mrs. Lerner was removed from her position, although I might note she retained her full retirement position from taxpayers' pension. John Koskinen was appointed as commissioner to sort the mess out, and as the president promised to restore faith in federal government, that he would act in the best interest of all of us and not abuse its power ever again. But after Lerner refused to testify before Congress, the IRS casually mentioned that some of her emails had gone missing, despite the subpoenas and orders to preserve them. Again, casually mentioned. In fact, we found out later the IRS had erased 422 backup tapes containing as many as 24,000 emails. Now think about that. If every email was one single page, you stack those all up, that would be 8 feet worth of erased emails. And when the commissioner told Congress under oath that many emails had been accidentally destroyed, he was lying. And when the commissioner told Congress under oath that his agency would provide investigators with all of Mrs. Lerner's remaining emails, he was lying. And when he told Congress under oath that the IRS would fully comply with any FOIA request and otherwise assist our investigation into the practice of unfairly targeting organizations for their First Amendment beliefs, he was lying. And then when he and his boss, the President of the United States, told the American people, under the sacred trust vested in all public officials, that he would reform the IRS, make it more transparent and less hostile to families, faith organizations, and small businesses, he was not telling the truth. The commissioner blatantly lied under oath on multiple occasions because he thought he could get away with it. Just like so many other administration officials, the commissioner believed he was above the law and beyond reproach. Tomorrow we have a chance to resoundingly prove Mr. Koskinen's audacious assumptions wrong. These articles of impeachment, 4 for each lie he told, represent the negative consequences that the average American would face if he lied under oath. Some have called this effort petty, even some who believe there are other officials more deserving of removal, and perhaps they are right. However, in this case, we have someone whose violations of the law and the public trust cannot be disputed. And I would hope, in light of the indisputable evidence, this body could perhaps move beyond the partisan divisions so that justice can be served. I encourage my fellow members to do the right thing and vote for accountability, vote for the rule of law, and vote for a government that is checking of its own power. I thank you, leadership of a congressman from Ohio and a true friend. This is a very serious issue. This is not a political issue. This is an issue of principle and rule of law for our government. And I yield back.
I thank the gentleman for his comments, which are right on target. We now recognize the gentleman from Arizona, our third gentleman from Arizona tonight, Mr. Schweikert.
Thank you, Jim, or Congressman Jordan, and Mr. Speaker. I'm going to actually wanted to touch on something that's a little bit different. Look, we've all seen the documents. We've all heard the argument even this evening on the bad acts. Now I want to walk you through why we must do this. And I understand for a lot of our brothers and sisters in this body, this is uncomfortable. This is something that hasn't been done in a very long time. But let me walk through sort of a line of logic, because you can't be a member of Congress and go home and do town halls and talk to reporters and say, I'm going to defend the Constitution, I'm going to defend our Article I authority, and then not stand up and defend it. So let's actually sort of do sort of a linear line of logic here. If tomorrow one of you became a CEO, 15 years ago, this body passed something called Sarbanes-Oxley, which basically said if you're in the leadership and someone commits bad acts in your organization, you accept the responsibility because you accepted that position of leadership. These are the things we require from the real world outside this body. Anyone here ever been a real estate broker, had a securities license, other types? If bad acts happened underneath your license, what happened? You lost your license. You were removed from that position. But somehow these rules, this concept of responsibility that this very body has put out on the rest of the country, the rest of the private sector is not willing or is uncomfortable in demanding the very same status of responsibility, the very same status of ethics that we require from a real estate broker to corporate executives, but we're not going to require it from the head of one of the most powerful bureaucracies in this nation. And this is to all my brothers and sisters in the body. I accept it's uncomfortable doing something you have not done before. That does not mean it isn't the right thing to do. You've heard the argument made. The facts are crisp and clear. Now it's time to make that decision. Are you willing to defend the Article 1 position that this body holds in the Constitution? Are you willing to defend the Constitution? Or are you willing to let our representation of the American people continue to be trampled on by this administration? Mr. Jordan, thank you for letting me near the mic.
I thank the gentleman for his good remarks, and we now recognize the gentleman from Pennsylvania, Mr. Perry.
Thank the gentleman from Ohio for his leadership, bringing this to our attention and giving us the time to talk about it. Ladies and gentlemen, Mr. Speaker, what we're talking about, I've heard all the facts, so I don't want to belabor them. Numerous protective orders, subpoenas, literally an order, a preservation order from his own organization, his own agency. The IRS commissioner just disregarded all that stuff and did exactly what he wanted to do in contravention to what any of us would do. Two standards of justice is what we're talking about. Whether it was for Lois Lerner, whether it was for John Koskinen, or whether it's for Hillary Clinton. Two standards of justice. One for them, one for the people that are connected, and one for all the rest of us, one for people out there in the real world. I remember in business, my business, when we got a letter from the IRS, oh, provide something from 4 years ago. We go to our accountant and say, well, we already turned this stuff in. We've submitted this stuff. Well, you have to save your records for 7 years, and you got to submit that, or you're going to be in trouble. I mean, when you get that, when you see something from the IRS, your heart stops. Do you think Lois Lerner's heart stopped? Do you think if the police were looking at you or investigating you, that you would get to go to the judge without talking to the police and say, hey, I'll tell you what happened here, but we don't need to involve the police in that. That's what happened here, folks. That's what happened, Mr. Speaker. Two standards of justice, one for all of us working people out there and one for the connected. Mr. Speaker, ladies and gentlemen, the facts are very clear, and it is our duty, it is our requirement under the Constitution to provide justice. And Mr. Koskinen will have his day in court, his due process. That is the impeachment process. That's where he can tell his story. He will have his day, but the people that have been aggrieved by the weaponization of this agency also must have their justice, and it has been denied to this point. With that, Mr. Speaker, I call for the actions that we're talking about, and I yield back, Mr. Jordan.
I thank the gentleman, and again, right on target, we now recognize the fine gentleman from Ohio, Mr. Davidson.
Thank you for the opportunity to address this body, Mr. Jordan, Mr. Chairman. It's an honor to be here tonight, but it's a sad time to be here and talking on this topic. As the newest guy here, I'm still figuring out a lot of things, so maybe for anybody that's thinking about this from home, this IRS scandal's been going on since 2010 was the first evidence of targeting. 6 years. A lot of people say, why are you guys still looking into this? Why has it taken so long to get to this? Congress has looked into it since 2013. It's been here for a long time. And what we see here is an act of frustration with a system that in our own body is having a hard time working. A lot of us would like to see this go through a judiciary committee, go through a different standard process, but that process has continued to stall, delay, and not happen. And I think we owe it to people that sent us here to do what we said we would do, which is to support and defend our Constitution. If this body can be ignored, if we can have people come and give inaccurate testimony, if we can have subpoenas ignored, if we can have evidence destroyed, then as George Will wrote, we at risk being completely irrelevant. And this is the dilemma. This isn't just the IRS that's done this. This is the email scandal from the State Department. And I remember the shock of the CNN anchor going, the Blackberries are destroyed. Fact check that. You just can't believe it. These kinds of things are really going on. I serve on the Science Committee where orders to report data breaches have occurred over and over, and inaccurate testimonies given. Subpoenas are being ignored by attorneys general for evidence
involving cases they're taking that are intended to stifle scientific research. And so when Congress is acting, the word is on the street. You can ignore these requests. You don't have to respond to subpoenas. You can destroy evidence, and you can always give an inaccurate testimony. Nothing is going to happen. So it's time we do take action. I hope we consider a course that keeps our IRS commissioner accountable and also sets an example that when Congress takes action, it should be taken seriously.
I thank the gentleman. Now recognized for our final speaker tonight, the gentleman from Georgia, Mr. Heiss. Mr. Speaker?
Gentleman's time has expired.
Mr. Speaker,
For what purpose does the gentleman from Georgia seek recognition? Without objection. Gentleman is recognized.
Mr. Speaker, we're facing an extremely important decision right now to examine and weigh the actions of an individual and determine whether or not we're going to hold that individual accountable. When John Koskinen entered the public arena, he then became accountable to the public. And that is what we're now facing. Here's an individual, Mr. Speaker, who routinely showed disrespect and contempt for this institution, who lied before our committees, who did not give us the evidence we needed to fulfill the investigations we were to do, and destroyed evidence literally on a massive scale, and we must hold him accountable for this. Here's an institution, the IRS, that has the power to destroy lives and to ruin businesses, and we know for a fact that even just a couple of weeks ago, the U.S. Court of Appeals for the D.C. Circuit determined that the IRS has been targeting conservatives and conservative organizations on multiple fronts, and they cannot confirm that that has ceased at all. And so we cannot let him get out of this with just a whimper. It's time for this House to do its job and hold him accountable. I thank the gentleman from Ohio for holding this special order, and I hope my colleagues will join in the impeachment proceedings of John Koskinen.
Gentleman's time has expired. Does the gentleman from Ohio have a motion?
I do, Mr. Speaker. I move that the House do now adjourn.
The question is on the motion to adjourn. Those in favor say aye. Those opposed, no. The ayes have it. The motion is adopted. Accordingly, the House stands adjourned until 9 a.m. tomorrow.